Hey all you cool cats and kittens, this is Lauren from Big Atheist Rescue. Hey everyone, this is Lauren. Welcome to Skeptic She, or welcome back. Before we jump into the topic of the day, I would like to mention some good and bad news. We are moving to a nicer neighborhood, which means I will no longer be living in this apartment and receiving Scientology magazines accidentally. I did post a poll on Twitter asking you all if you think I should have a fake name and try to subscribe to the magazines myself, or pretend to be the person whose name is on the magazines I accidentally get currently, or if I should just let it go, just let it be the end of a magical fluke of an era. I'm a little sad about this, but surprisingly most of you said just let it go, let it be a fluke. I'm feeling like that may be the wisest thing after all, just because Scientology does have a tendency to mess with people, and I feel like if I try to use a fake name or change someone else's address just to get their mail, they're gonna maybe see through that and try to mess around with me a little bit. I have no idea. I'm still debating whether I want to take that risk or not, so for now I'm just gonna say no. We are moving on, with the exception of the Scientology magazines I have now that I haven't gone through yet. Someone did suggest that I ask the new residents of this apartment if they could send me the Scientology magazines, but I don't even know how to begin. It's just such a weird time with social distancing. We'll see what happens, but I just wanted to let you know this isn't going to be Scientology all the time anymore, which is kind of what I wanted anyway. With that, today we are going to be reading off another one of my blog posts. As always, there's a link to this blog post in the description if you would like to follow along, or if you would like to take a look at some additional sources and links. With no further ado, let's get started. If you've ever believed in a personal God, specifically the Christian one, at some point you may have thought about the nature of God's mind. If he is omniscient or all-knowing, can he ever change his mind? If he can, does that mean he is subject to outside influence and may not be omnipotent or all-powerful? If he cannot change his mind, does that also call his omnipotence into question? Do people even have free will? Does he?
Disclaimer, I personally think free will is an illusion, but we are talking about theists here, not me.
If God cannot change his mind, then what's the point of prayers of petition or asking God for something other than to show him trust? For that matter, why would anyone need to show that they trust him if he already knows whether or not they do? Well, there's one interesting doctrine that attempts to answer these questions and tries to reconcile God's omniscience and omnipotence with the free will of humans. It's called open theism, otherwise known as openness theology or free will theism. It's messy, to say the least, but I did consider myself an open theist for a short time, and I found the doctrine pretty refreshing. According to pastor and author Greg Boyd, who is also a very popular open theist, open theism is this.
In a nutshell, I usually describe it as simply the belief that possibilities are real. It really comes down to that. Possibilities are real. And that God, who is omniscient, knows all things, knows possibilities are real. Just like he knows that an elephant is an elephant, and a monkey is a monkey, and an actuality is an actuality, he knows a possibility is a possibility.
To elaborate on this, it's the belief that because God created the world out of love, he created it with possibilities, giving humans the ability to freely make any of a virtually infinite number of choices. He does not always know what the outcomes will be, but he does know that a variety of possibilities exist. I've heard a couple of open theists explain this slightly differently, saying that God could know all outcomes if he wanted to, but he chooses not to. He can thus respond to and be moved by his creation, making his relationship to humans more intimate and mutual. It's a nice thought, really. I certainly thought so in the short time that I followed this doctrine, but as you can imagine, it's pretty controversial among many Christians, as Boyd touches on here.
It conflicts with the classical view, which held that when God created the world, and actually before God created the world, from all eternity, all facts were settled. So every fact of world history was resolved before the world was ever created, from all eternity. And then the classical view would debate whether God resolved it by willing it, and that's the more Calvinist perspective, or whether God simply knew it was resolved, and that's the more Arminian perspective. But either way, all facts are resolved. Open theists simply believe that when God created the world, he created it with possibilities, unresolved possibilities. And to the degree that the world consists of unresolved possibilities, then the fact that God knows is that it may go this way or that way. God created a world in which the future is to some degree open.
Now, of course, as an atheist and secular humanist, I don't disagree that our existence is full of unresolved possibilities, and I have no problem with this. This is reality. The difference between Greg Boyd and me is that I don't think there's a supernatural creator behind those possibilities. But for Christianity, open theism causes a lot of problems, and frankly, it only gives me more reason to be an atheist. But we'll expand on that in a bit. First, here's why Boyd and other open theists find the doctrine to be especially valid and beneficial to contemporary believers.
Up to this point, the world has been much more conducive to a deterministic view than an open view. Now, however, everything's changing. We are in a new day. Science is much more open to openness stuff. The categories of science are not the rigid ones that we got from the Newtonian worldview. So the ultimate gestalt of the world, at least the Western world, is changing in a way that I think is actually much more conducive to the biblical worldview than the deterministic view ever was.
On that last point, yes, there are certainly examples of God changing his mind in the Bible, but there are also plenty of claims that God never changes his mind. So 1 point for open theism, another point for the classical perspective. It's yet another case of the Bible contradicting itself, being the antiquated, cobbled together mess that it is, and I don't feel the need to expand on which view is more biblical. But moving on, let's dig into why open theism is quite damning to Christianity and theistic beliefs in general. First, as it kind of came off to me in that last clip, Boyd is admitting, in so many words, that if Christians don't embrace this
openness stuff
and progress with society and science, then they are on the wrong side of history. Like many progressive Christians, open theists apparently try to prevent this embarrassment. The difference is that open theists try to do so by claiming that God can and does change his mind, and he wants humans to do it with him and for him. Now, as far as progressive Christianity in more common terms, believers are willing to change with the times while still believing that God is unchanging and that he foreknows how society will change. Free will exists, but God knows what people will do with it. It's cognitive dissonance however you spin it, so no one really wins here. In any case, here's what I think is the biggest piece of bad news for open theists. Their doctrine is arguably a slippery slope towards blatantly admitting that humans invented God. Of course, I would argue that pretty much all theologies reveal this fact to some degree, but open theism does it in an especially overt way. Whatever happens for the benefit of an open theist, i.e. an affirmatively answered prayer, often happens because they influenced God's will to make it so. Now, I suppose this isn't really any worse than the deterministic view in which believers can justify virtually anything after it happens, good or bad, by claiming it was God's will. But still, open theists have the audacity to essentially claim some power over God. They wouldn't put it that way, of course, but how else would you describe what Boyd says next?
The open view encourages people to really take responsibility for your life. Whether you pray or not, things really hang on it. The future is not in any sense pre-settled. That we are really co-creators with God. Now, I want to be careful. I'm not saying that we're little gods or something like that, but God really empowers us to partner with him to bring about the creation that he wants. Our choices really make a difference. There are things that really are at stake in what we do. You're important to the kingdom, and so God needs you to stand up and live passionately and give it all you got and get in the kingdom, get in the game, and do what you're called to do.
Okay, so Greg Boyd is claiming to be co-creators with God, saying that God needs believers, and he has to clarify that he's not saying we're little gods, which is actually exactly what he's saying. That certainly sounds like a slippery slope to me, and I'm a little surprised that I didn't think so while I was Christian. As one article from an Ontario church says, open theism fashions a God much closer to Adam than Jesus. Further digging this hole, Greg Boyd does some circular reasoning on his website to try and keep open theism on solid ground, saying, contrary to what critics of open theism claim, open theists affirm that God always knows everything perfectly. It's just that we have reason to believe a partly open future is part of what God perfectly knows. Tricky, right? For one thing, doesn't God exist outside of time and therefore can't have a future per se, let alone an open one? This gets really complicated really fast, and we're left with an abundance of question begging. Now, to be fair, I'm not a Christian anymore, and I really don't have a problem with open theism. After all, I don't really have a stake in trying to get to know the nature of a being I don't think exists. Also, I can appreciate what open theists promote: responsibility for one's actions, a willingness to learn and embrace new information, and a desire to live with earnestness, passion, and purpose. I would guess that this is what most reasonable humans support, regardless of what they do or don't believe. So, points for open theism. Yet the fact that open theism is a concept at all, let alone that there are countless denominations within each theistic religion, shows that at best, God finds it more important to remain mysterious than to reveal himself in an unquestionably clear and consistent way, and it's up to his flawed creation to fill in the gaps. He allows division to be sown among us, rather than making it easy for everyone to at least believe he exists, not to mention that he's worthy of universal worship. The good news for all of us, there's no empirical evidence to demonstrate that such a coy God, or any God, exists. So, open theists, you're already willing to take the reins on your own future, in as much as anyone is capable of doing so within the limits of time, place, and person. Why not remove the complication of God and admit that you were the creators all along? That's my rant on open theism. There's definitely a lot more to it. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of complexities that I would highly encourage you to look further into. Yeah, it is really interesting for all its faults, and I did really appreciate what it tried to do when I first heard about open theism, so it's not the worst thing in the world, but it is definitely very bluntly saying, hey, God is whoever we want him to be. And to me, that's just saying, God probably doesn't exist, so we're gonna wing it and pretend that our will is aligned with his, like most other theists seem to do. With that said, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy, continuing to take this pandemic thing seriously. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it with your friends. Subscribe to my channel if you have not already. Keep asking questions, and I will see you next time. Reset. I'm an anxiety sweater.